This is Scorched Vine, a Vin Noir's production of Hope's Nocturne, Chapter 4, Part 2. How many people have you told? Pointless to ask how you found out. He squinted down at her. Why? She asked, wrinkling her nose up at him. Again, I rest my case. He thought and heaved a sigh. Because... He swallowed, wondering why he cared what this kid thought, what anyone thought. I haven't accepted it, and I'm not going to, he answered. He stepped around her and made his way to the narrow path that led up to the road. He could hear the rocks crunch as she caught up to him. Before you ask, because I can hear that next "why" screaming its way out of your head. He yelled over his shoulder as they walked. Like those who don't have a closet full, not everyone can afford to spend an extra 2 years in school. I have to work. He was surprised by the lack of embarrassment that accompanied his explanation. They walked in blissful silence for the rest of the climb. He'd slowed his pace a few times, hearing her struggle, breathing hard as the incline increased, remembering her legs weren't as long as his. When the path became a little difficult or slippery, he stopped. Taking her hand, he helped her up a boulder and allowed her to take the lead. How did you make it up the cliff? He wondered. Maybe down is easier than up. As Amanda once again brought up his scholarship, Manaus quietly groaned, wondering again how she'd found out about something that was supposed to be private. And to how many people would he have to explain that he wouldn't be accepting the scholarship? Then there was the embarrassment it would cause him later on. Which topic did you choose for your key speech in Mr. Federico's class? She asked, sitting on and then swinging her legs over a branch that had fallen across the path. I'd already done research on the pre-World War I and II socio-political atmosphere existing in Germany, he answered, using the branch like a balance beam, swinging his entire body over. I spoke about what caused people to turn on their neighbors, what caused them to turn on people whom they'd worked with, had shared experiences with, had fought with during World War I. She huffed, tilting her chin up. Turning, she continued walking. Not impressed, he smiled, having caught a glimpse of irritation in her eyes. Why? She asked over her shoulder, picking up the pace when the path flattened out. I wanted to know the difference between the people who survived and those who didn't. I needed to know what inspired the few who, out of the goodness of their heart, risked their lives to save people they didn't know, he answered. catching up to her. When she frowned up at him, he smiled. Competitive, Squeaky? He wondered. So, did you find out what you were looking for? She asked. Yes and no, he sighed. I'm still looking. Still trying to pinpoint the thing that preceded it. Still trying to find the best way to prepare to save my family, if it ever comes to that, he thought. He glanced over at her and then looked down at the path. And you, too, if it comes to it. Have you given any thought to what kind of address? Have you given any thought to what your key address will be? He asked. Dad suggested I read some of my poetry, she said, glancing over and scrunching her face up at him. What, not good? He asked, pulling her closer when she would have stumbled over a large rock. Thank you, she said, as he let go of her. And no. Okay, what about history? I haven't heard of anyone covering the Franco-Prussian Wars yet, he suggested. Vigorously shaking her head, she frowned up at him. History is not really my thing, she mumbled. We never really gelled. That's a travesty. How is that possible? Almost everything is informed by history. He frowned down at her. We should work on that, along with your left hook, he thought. Okay, current events then. How about Ribera's long-standing position as a home for the dispossessed? Take a look at some of the issues that have come up, specifically the South Point encampment, he encouraged, noting that they were getting closer to the end of the tree line. They don't seem really grateful. For having somewhere to stay, I mean, she said, echoing the sentiment of some around her. At least that's what I've heard. Don't just accept that, he scowled. Follow the money. Who's profiting? Was the offer made truly out of the generosity of the Deseo's heart? Or were they being paid to provide housing, as meager as it was, to the disenfranchised? Never assume that it's they, them, or the other's problem. Never assume that our issues aren't all the same. You're not immune from the same things that affect them. Manaus huffed, shoving his hands into his pockets. He breathed deeper in an effort to calm himself. There's no such thing as a safe place or safe distance from the destruction, the consequences that affect others, he said, when he could trust his tone was neither too harsh nor his voice too loud. He hadn't meant to scare her, but those jade pools were 2 sizes wider now. If you don't know the history behind an agreement, or the true cost of the ink on the paper, the lives and freedoms that were lost, how would you recognize the signs that it's about to happen to you? You could completely miss a precursor because you didn't realize that it happened before. You wouldn't know what to look for. How would you if you had no knowledge of the past? When he saw the narrowing of her eyes, he explained, "Did the land that was used even belong to the Deseos in the first place? Take a trip to the area." He frowned, rethinking that advice. "Just not by yourself. Take a whiff. Smell not just the brine on the air, but also the underlying chemical notes. Look at the foam washing down the riverbanks and the overflowing on their streets. The ungrateful, as you call them, clean that mess up every day instead of paying rent. But what does it do to their health in the long run? What was the cost of illness on a family?" He wondered, what was the cost for my mom? She walked quietly beside him for a few heartbeats. He wondered if he'd said too much and pushed too far. He could see his friends now, just beyond the tree line, huddled around the van. They would drop her home, and then that would be the end of it. Then they would drive around the area looking for odd jobs before it got too late. Peter and Jock are probably mad, he thought. "Can you repeat all that when we get to a place where I can write? My notepad is in my back pocket," she informed him. "You're getting an early start on your keynote, aren't you?" He looked down at her. "Aren't you just 11? 13, she corrected. "Sorry." He paused, holding his hands up. "I stand corrected. 13-year-old. Still too young to start that class." "Still too young for that class," Manos goaded her.